Hi, everyone. We're about to kickstart the next panel discussion, which is two elephants in two rooms, where we will talk about the China and India market. So if you are interested in listening to this panel, and we have quite the star-studded panelist crew here today, can I invite people to move to the front, take your seats, and then we can get this started. In terms of the logistics, let me just walk people through what's going to happen today. So first we will have Lisa Hanson, who is the CEO of Niko Partners. She will do a very brief 10-minute presentation on China, followed by Anuj, who is the CEO of JetSynthesys Gaming. Before we will wrap up with like a 40-minute panel discussion between the six of us. So without further ado, may I invite Lisa Hanson to give us a presentation on China. Lisa, please.
Hello, hello. I think more people should come on down and sit in the seats so I can talk to people directly. Everyone come. I'm told that BITKRAFT is going to give free games to everyone who's sitting down in a chair in the next 5, 4, 3, 2. No? All right, well, the people up here, they're the lucky ones. Okay, so my presentation is about China, and I only have like 10 minutes, so I'm going to get going on it. 750 million reasons to understand China's games market. And that, I hope you know, is about the number of gamers that we think will be in China in the next few years. You might have heard of a little game called Black Myth Wukong. It's kind of taking the world by storm, but it is not the only exciting part of China's games market these days. Black Myth Wukong is really important for a lot of reasons, but I'm not going to spoil some of Jonathan's panel questions by talking about it too much here. This is just me saying I acknowledge that Black Myth Wukong is on everybody's mind who's looking at China, but that's not really what I'm talking about in these slides. Niko Partners is a market research firm that's covered the video game industry in Asia for 20 plus years. I founded it, and all of those years we've been looking at China, then gradually adding more and more countries across Asia and Middle East. And now, with all of that history of Chinese knowledge, we have, I went ahead of myself, unfortunately. So I wanted to go back to that previous slide, but I don't know how to do it. There we go, okay. So anyway, we have established quite a database of information and data and insights on China. And what we're talking about here is a gigantic market. So we're looking at about $50 billion in revenue. Only about 2% of that per year is from console gaming. Most of it is mobile. Like, you guys could think about it as maybe 68%, 30-something%, and like 2 to 3% mobile, PC, and console. And we're approaching like 720 million gamers this year, rising up in the future years. So this is a lot of people spending a lot of money each year on games. In fact, it probably, if we exclude console, it's about 60% of the, our markets in total, including China, make up about 60% of the revenue of the world, and China is a big chunk of that. Chinese gamers are very discerning. They have a long history of playing games, a lot of them on PC. Mobile is the biggest segment, but these discerning gamers have specific gaming behaviors. There still are like 120,000 internet cafes in China. We have about 20,000, this thing has a mind of its own, 20,000 esports hotels, which are basically like internet cafes without many of the regulations. So there are a lot of places people go to be social while they're gaming, and it is the least expensive form of social entertainment in China, and that is why one of the drivers for the success of the games industry. PC gamers are spending more and more money on gaming, and mobile gamers, like I said, the revenue from mobile games makes up about 68, 70% of the revenue in China. But more and more money each year is being spent by PC gamers, and as we start looking at Black Myth Wukong and some other premium titles, I think that might even rise. Mini games are something that's unique, well, not probably exclusively to China, but Tencent's making a lot of money off of mini games. And mini games is something that perhaps might be an easier path to entry, and in many cases aren't subject to a lot of the same ISBN rules as you might have been kind of scared off by hearing. The big companies in China are, of course, Tencent and NetEase, but they are not the only important companies in China. Tencent and NetEase combined take about 60% of the market share in China for PC and mobile games. There are some other important ones, though, you can see on this list. MiHoYo, 37 Games, Lilith, Century Games, they're all very active and chasing at the share of Tencent and NetEase. But they're also not only domestic game developers and they are also exporting to other countries. So when we look at Tencent's revenue, it's $18 billion in domestic game service revenue and already $3.7 billion in overseas revenue. NetEase has $9.2 billion domestically and $1.3 billion overseas, and so forth. And MiHoYo is almost as much from overseas as it is from domestic. So we're looking at a country and an industry that is really in earnest pushing its way outside of China and into the rest of the world. Domestically, though, this is a massive market. I mentioned $50 billion in revenue. So $50 billion in revenue is something that people should get a hold of. 720 million people now playing, rising up to maybe 750 million in the coming years. That's a lot of people. And even those who spend just a little bit could add up to a lot of revenue for your company. And you don't always have to get an ISBN, which is the name of the publishing license that is given out once you apply and are accepted to have your game approved in the Chinese market. There are ways. So if your game has no kind of in-game economy, you don't really need to have an ISBN. If your game is distributed on Steam International, that's a big risk because sometime they might choose to shut that down, but they haven't yet, and you don't need an ISBN. Many games that are distributed on Steam International do have ISBNs, but you don't necessarily have to. So it's a growing market, even though the growth rate is small, like single-digit growth, but it's still something that is growing, and when we have the law of large numbers, it can't possibly expect it to be growing at like double digits forever and ever, so it stands to reason. There are AAA games being published or developed in China now, and it's a very heavily engaged esports community. Esports games and games that use esports kind of philosophically have much longer tails, are highly engaged, and generate a lot of revenue. So esports is kind of a way of thinking. We call the behavioral patterns for playing esports games align with the motivations for gamers to play games in China and throughout Asia. We call this the 4 C's. Competition, completion, community, and challenge. You can find those as like motivations of gamers as well as the behavioral patterns of esports overall. And ISBNs are, like I mentioned, they are the license required to publish games in China, domestic games or foreign, but there are ways around it. There are loopholes, and the government knows about these loopholes, but there are loopholes. And now we're watching as this chart goes through the first half of 2024, but even more, like 109 games were announced on September 27th, and there were another batch of games announced in August. And we expect there'll probably be more than 1,300 games approved in China this year, plus the games that are available on Steam that don't have ISBN but are wildly popular. Black Myth Wukong, by the way, does have an ISBN. This is too small a font for you to read, so I'm just going to tell you that there's been like this steady calendar of regulations and policies that have been important to many people, such as when they introduced the policy to limit the number of hours per week that gamers under the age of 18 are allowed to play games. Even that has a loophole, though. So it is 3 hours per week, specific hours, 8 to 9 p.m., Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and sometimes extra hours on school holidays. But those are only for online games. So offline games, console games, they can be played as much as the kids want. And there are lots of people that kind of skirt the rules, even if the rules exist. So now, though, the government is really in favor of gaming. They see games like Genshin Impact and Black Myth Wukong as great ambassadors for Chinese culture around the world. And they're very supportive of esports and more. Even Black Myth Wukong, the government of Shanxi province, is really into this game because I think it's something like 29 of the sites that are highlighted in the game are in Shanxi province, and the tourism rate is off the charts. People are going to see all these places that they're playing in the game. That's the end of my short but sweet slides, and I would love to talk to you more about China and the rest of Asia after this panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anuj Tandon. I've been in the gaming industry for the last 14 years as a founder, operator, and my last role was an investor for Krafton for India and Middle East. I deployed over $135 million for them in the region. And I'm going to give you a quick outlook on India. I think coming to this summit, I was a very optimistic guy overall in life. Just coming to SFO with GDC and the summit, I felt a little depressed, and I've been wondering what is happening. Maybe I'm living in a bubble that everything is going great for the country at the moment, that I felt a little uneasy. Like, why is everyone talking about layoffs when Indian companies are hiring the highest rates? Why are people talking about less IPOs when all the IPO records are being broken in India? So I'm going to give you maybe one of the few markets that is now doing pretty well and it's sort of emerging. And it's poetic justice for this panel that India is following up China. So in a way, it's poetic justice. So I'll just give you a quick background about the country. I think let's start with the basic macros, the GDP, right? And it's one of the highest growing GDPs. It matters in the context because it's a young gaming market. It's only been 10 years when people have really started playing games, right? And it's overall 1.42 billion people, so growing at the rate of 7.8% and beating all other economies, so the fastest growing economy. What is driving a lot of this excitement around VC investments overall in the India market is the number of IPOs that have happened in the last 3 years. India was always considered as a market that never showed outcome to VCs for liquidity. I think that has changed in the last 3 years. It's got the most number of IPOs as a VCP-backed companies in tech. And some of the first wave of internet companies have started going public, which is, food delivery, fintechs, e-commerce, and now we also have a gaming company that went IPO. What is two things that is driving this? The FDI inflows, the foreign direct investments are increasing in India as it's a growing economy. The second thing is, which is the most exciting part if you ask me, is the local investors are now investing more in public markets and equities markets, as well as AIFs and VC-backed companies than ever. So the economy is changing from a conservative debt-based investments to more risk-taking as a local incentives drive that. Now, this is an important slide. In the media and entertainment gaming, very important to understand where does the spending power, like India is a massive country, right? 1.42 billion people, who are the real paying users and where are they spread across? Just to give in context, it's around if you're targeting as a global strategic, you want to target the Indian gamers, it will be the top 10% who speak English, top 20% people who speak English. That's easy for you to target. But if you really want to scale your game like some of the games have, then you have to really go deep in the market. What I want to present by this slide is just to give you an idea quickly that the affluent and the elite class in India is actually growing, and this is 40%. So that's 40% of 1.4 billion is, yeah, it's like a massive 500 million people that will be earning more than 15K, which is, in dollar terms might be less, but a dollar is like 84 rupees. So pretty decent in terms of rupees, what they have spending power. What is the other fundamental? It is one of the fastest growing 5G networks after China, of course, is in India. That means cheapest data rates in the world, which is also growing in speed. That means you have a lot of content consumption by a lot of people. So that is one of the other pillars that is driving this mass consumption of apps and games and content overall. The third is how are people paying, right? So the digital infrastructure of payments in India is completely transformed the way people sort of have relationship with money, right? The spending power through the UPI, the United Payment Interface, has given a mass adoption to digital payments. So that has changed the relationship people had with money to a large extent. We used to hoard a lot of cash, and that is transforming into digital transactions a lot. It's one of the highest digital transactions in the world, and which is all leading to a lot of deal activity in the media, entertainment, and gaming sector. So these are the four basic sort of fundamentals. I just wanted to set the context on why this market is exciting. And of course, I've given the 2020 numbers here to give that we have still only captured, say, 40 to 50% of the population, right? And it's this decade, when we are transforming from a 3 trillion economy to a 5 trillion economy, there's huge potential left for growth. And that means, coming to the main topic of this, is are gamers going to grow? It is one of the fastest growing market in terms of gamers. Yes, I know there's a lot of question, the low ARPU users, yes, but I'm going to address that in the next slide. But it's the highest number of game downloads. Two important things to note here. Number one, it's the only market in the world where you still get organic users. Everywhere else, the organic growth for your mobile games have died. India and Middle East are the two markets where organic growth is still happening. So if you're thinking of launching any new game, these two markets you should be thinking about. And number two, most importantly, is to understand that having a long-term view on India for gaming is a no-brainer. These are some of the gaming trends, and I can give you some operational knowledge since I've been an operator myself and worked in a few of these top companies, is a lot of 80% of the content consumed in India still for gaming is more global content rather than local content. That means, games like PUBG and Subway Surfers all these games are still very, very popular in terms of monthly active users, right? And 20% of that, which is the green shoots and the larger opportunity, is actually local content, which is developed by local developers. The two takeaways again. The first, there's a lot of scope for local entrepreneurs to make games for Indian audience. And number two is that global developers, if they play their cards right, there's opportunity to build your user growth story. So yeah, so that's this. And revenue-wise, I think this is very interesting to understand here. Till about 5 years back, the Indian users, the payment habits for in-app purchase was very, very low. I think now there are at least 5 games where the IAP spends for mobile gamers is closer to 100 million a year. So that's a transformative number because you have $100 million being spent by consumers. And for the Battle Royale games, which is the most popular games that are monetized, like BGMI and Free Fire, that number is close to $250 million, which is trending towards that. So that's the amount of in-app purchase spends that are happening now as more and more population is getting used to paying for content. Again, I'll give you some context. The gaming industry in India was never like all the other markets. Like even in China, back in '95, you had the PC gaming setup. You played RPGs. There was a culture of gaming. India missed the entire console cycle. India missed the entire PC gaming cycle. We directly jumped on mobile, and it's just a 10-year-old industry. So 10-year-old, the gaming habits are still being formed. People try different games. People switch from one game to the other. So there's a lot of opportunity for sort of, new developers to build an audience over there. This is something to give you guys an insight about what is unique about the market. Of course, it's still largely a casual gaming audience. Mid-core is growing, Battle Royale is growing. But there's a third element in India, which was again similar to China, is real money gaming. Real money gaming is basically you can cash in and cash out. You can put money and you can make money out, something like DraftKings in the US, right? It is one of the largest sectors, and you can actually do games like even poker and are allowed for real money gaming in India. Not allowed as in, there's no regulatory authority, so it's a game of skill, so it passes off as a game of skill. You can do real money gaming, and it's one of the largest sectors. Also shows how this market is sort of transforming. First, you introduce gaming to anyone in a new market. We've seen historically it's the social casino, gambling apps that first come in and capture the market, and then the audience builds up for the other games. It's following a similar pattern seen in the other markets as well. These are the first wave of winners, so to say, in the gaming space. In the last 10 years, 12 years, these are the winners, like Dream 11, out of which most of them, if you see, are categorized as real money gaming companies, which are doing more than, say, $200 million to even $800 million in revenue. And their valuations and people who have invested in these companies have been able to create multifold returns. One of the examples is Play Simple, which is now part of the MTG, was acquired for $500 million, and the seed investors invested at a $20 million pre-money round. So huge opportunities like these to invest in terms of spotting these early trends and picking these entrepreneurs at an early stage. So these are the winners, and a lot of these companies are going public. Fun fact, Nazara, which raised $100 million from public markets in India, raised at a 69x EBITDA multiple last week. So the kind of multiples you're getting in gaming for India market are nowhere to be seen in the world right now. And to talk about regulations, I think this is important. There are two regulations. One is the real money gaming regulations, and one is the video gaming regulations. The video gaming regulations are very simple. Nothing related to China should be launched in India. There's geopolitical stuff. TikTok is banned. PUBG Mobile is banned. So anything to do with and that creates, in a way, a vacuum, right? One of the largest producer of games in the world and one of the largest consumer of games in the world. Two big things, and they cannot interact. So there is a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs to create sort of that bridging opportunity. So there's very interesting dynamics in play. And trust me, I know, I worked for a Chinese company when the bans happened. It's not funny at all. So, so that is one of the regulations, but that affects the video gaming sector. In the real money gaming, there are taxation issues. There's no bans as such, but there are a lot of taxation issues one has to navigate. But I think overall, if you look at from a standpoint of regulations, India is more easier to get in and get out than compared to other jurisdictions. It's not a big black box. It's slightly gray. So I think, and its government's intent is to make it simpler. So they are going to launch a self-regulatory authority for gaming and gaming regulations. It's not going to be as comprehensive as China, but yeah, I mean, on the lines of how they are thinking, but it's not going to be a blocked internet. It's still going to be an open internet for global companies to come in, except China. So that's on the regulations. Again, I have 10 minutes, so I'm just rushing this. I think there's a lot of cultural export that can be done. I'm happy to talk with you guys after the panel on the India market. Thank you.
Pull up in motorcades. I got a show today. It's all I'm trying to do. Hustle and motivate. Choppers a throwaway. Hustle the overweight. That's why they follow me up.
Hello. All right. Thanks for those two very insightful presentations, Lisa, Anuj. Before we begin, I would like to take the chance to introduce two other panelists that will be joining us today. Joe, who's CEO of LILA Games, as well as Magnus, CEO of Light Up. Maybe Joe and Magnus, you guys want to take a minute to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Joe Kim. I'm with a game studio called LILA Games. We're working on a mobile extraction shooter, largely based in India, and with a few global folks. But previous to LILA Games, I also previously worked at a company called Fun Plus around, 2015-ish or so. And so also have experience leading game development in Beijing as well. So I do believe I can bring a little bit of context in terms of developing in China and India.
Hi, I'm Magnus. I'm the CEO at Light Up Games. We're a global games publisher based in Shanghai. So essentially, we try to find these hidden gems in China and bring them to the rest of the world. We try to focus on indie games within specific product categories, pretty much. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe and Magnus. Quick introduction about myself. My name is Jonathan. I'm a principal on the BITKRAFT team, and I drive the Asia-Pacific investments for the firm. So we've had like a very insightful insight and an overview of China and India as a market. So maybe let's dive straight into the topics that we wanted to discuss. There's a lot that we want to discuss. Like, I don't think we have enough time to talk about everything. Just India or China by itself probably takes an hour or more just to scratch the tip of the iceberg. But maybe let's start with like a topic to ease us in, right? Lisa, maybe you could opine on this, right? I was very curious about your history of 20 years and Niko studying China. China rose over the last, I would call it 15 to 20 years, but it came from like a very highly regulated market, a lot of bans, console was banned, and then today it's one of like the largest mobile developers in the world. So what gives? What happened in this market? Why has it been able to do so well, not just on the domestic stage, but also on the international stage?
Well, the 20-year growth path that you're talking about, I think if we look back in time, the way China got started with games is as the host of insourcing studios. So companies like Ubisoft or Bandai, and at that point it was Bandai and Namco separately, and other companies had hired staff in Shanghai predominantly to help develop their games. And then those people got a little bit tired of working for those foreign companies without much credit in the game, went off and started doing outsourcing studios. Those people grew up a little more, started forming their own developers, starting to form their own publishers, and so forth. And so there was a lot of evolution along that path based on a very heavy concentration of math and science in school. So there was a lot of ready-made kind of development talent sitting there. Shanghai is also kind of the nexus for China Telecom, China Unicom, China Mobile now, and back then not China Mobile, but China Telecom, China Unicom, where they would go, one would go north and one would go south. So that was sort of like, if you looked at some of the Harvard Business School kind of ways of looking at competitiveness among cities, this is why Shanghai kind of emerged. But now, over time, consoles were banned back in 2001, and that was so, to protect Chinese youth from the perils of foreign content. But then, there were all kinds of other things that came up with PC gaming and eventually mobile gaming, and then eventually the 14-year ban was lifted on consoles. And I think that what's happened in the intervening time, as China has had has the opportunity to develop its own domestic industry, and it's not just receiving kind of imports from abroad, and so there's a lot more the whole game is controlling content. So there's a lot more control over the content, a lot more direction of like focusing on cultural mythical history or other kind of lore. And the gamers have gotten to be very discerning, and the talent of development has gotten to be very strong. And I think that probably brings us up to modern day.
And Joe, do you have any experiences to share when you were at FunPlus, actually, back in the day?
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing about China is just the incentive structure, right? And so you can have a number of employees that are heavily compensated on a bonus scheme. And for key talent, there are cash-based incentives that can be given to key talent. Because I do think that one of the things that's common between China and India is that this notion of equity and ESOP is not as prevalent. And so I think what China has done well is created an incentive structure that highly motivates a lot of their employees to work more and to work harder. And you know, maybe something I'll say that might be a little bit controversial here is that when it comes to new game development, I think that is a critical ingredient in terms of optimizing your chances of success is that kind of hardcore work ethic. And I think that's one thing that China has gotten right.
I think for better or worse, we've also heard some horror stories that's come out from China. I think it was the Financial Times that covered it recently that said that there's this phenomenon where if you were to join a game studio, you would know that if you don't become like the #1 guy in either segment within the studio, say production or art or design, they will fire you by the time you are 35. And that sort of like forces people, it's like a very up and out kind of culture that's made it like so brutal, like the work culture. And in China, I think Magnus, you've heard this a lot from like Alibaba, the 996 culture, which is you work 9 days, 9 hours, from 9 to 9 for 6 days, 6 days a week, right? And I think that's sort of like incentive structure, and it's almost a reverse incentive structure, if you will, if you don't like crunch enough and you're always at risk of being replaced.
Yeah, I will say though that like I do think that people overestimate a little bit the whole notion of 996 because it does exist, but it doesn't exist as much as people believe, right? And so there are a number of studios that don't have that kind of hardcore work culture, so it's not as prevalent as people think. But I would say, and again, maybe something controversial that I would say is that of the successful studios, I see that more often than not.
Yeah, and I can add to that. Sometimes the biggest problem for us is that we have to tell them to work a bit less. And that's a bit weird in my opinion, but that's a fact. They work extremely hard all the time. That's what I can see.
And maybe this is a good segue for me to ask, because like Magnus, you focus a lot on looking for developers in China that are producing on PC and maybe some on console, specifically for Steam, right? And before I go to you, I'd first like to ask Lisa. We saw how China has predominantly been like a mobile developer hub. And then Wukong came out, like almost out of nowhere. And then now everybody's like worried about, oh, is China going to become like a PC console kind of powerhouse, right? And Magnus himself is already looking for PC like developers in China. So how did they make the transition from like building on mobile into going to PC and console?
Well, the studio Game Science that came out with Black Myth Wukong has been working on this game for quite a long time. And I mean, Niko Partners, we have been writing about it since their big trailer reveal in 2020. But that studio had only come out with mobile games before, and I think only maybe 2, not very many. So there isn't, like, we can't draw from that a reason why a studio might be able to pivot from mobile to PC gaming, other than like they had a great idea for a great game and they decided to invest a lot in it. Black Myth Wukong is very popular in China for a lot of reasons, that it draws on this Legend of the Monkey King. It's a beautiful game, and it's just a very high quality development. So I think what the rest of the world is, you know, just flabbergasted about is, where did that high quality of development come from? And I think that, you know, if you look at Genshin Impact and some other games, that they already have some high quality development going on. It just so happens that this game is now a premium PC game, you know, being categorized by the gamers as AAA. So I think that is like the unique place in it, but I don't think there's any kind of point in the trajectory where there was this natural pivot from mobile. They just go where the money's gonna be. So the gamers wanna play mobile games, you're going to develop mobile games. If there's an increase in PC gaming, and Steam's not going away, well, why not do the PC game thing? But this isn't something that you bat your eyes and it goes overnight. I mean, it's been a very long time in development. So I think that it's, again, about recruitment and putting whatever your best practices are to work. And, this game does naturally show that talent exists in a lot of places, even if, like, the Western investors don't want to recognize that it's coming from somewhere in the middle of China or anywhere else. It's talent can emerge anywhere, and China is definitely a force to be reckoned with, not only as a market of $50 billion a year and all those 750 million gamers that I mentioned, but a force to be reckoned with on the development scene too, pushing out with exports, pushing out with excellence, and it's a player. It's definitely a player.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen maybe 5 to 10 games similar to Wukong in the last year while traveling around China. So I mean, Wukong didn't surprise me at all, which is, I mean, it's really nice to see that they managed to put out a game of that kind of quality. But also, really, what I've also seen in the last 3 years is that a lot of developers on the mobile side, they pivoted to making PC and console games. And one of the reasons is because of the regulatory challenges, let's say. I had conversations with a lot of studios that they were just asking me questions like, how do I move from mobile to PC? Just because the fierce competition in China, and as a result of the ISBNs, the number of games that have been approved in China for this official license called ISBN, right, went down. So yeah, that had an impact as well.
Okay, I'm very cautious of time because we're running out of time already. So maybe shifting gears here very quickly, and let's talk a bit about India, right? In my past life, when I was doing TMT investing, there was this general saying that China is, on average, 3 to 5 years behind US in terms of tech innovation, and that India is 3 to 5 years behind China. And so because of that, I think there is this general consensus in the market that, hey, India is actually following a very similar trajectory to what China is doing. Right, China and India bears many similarities in terms of demographics, like population. So, Anuj, do you think that it's too obvious to say that India will follow a similar path than China? What's different between China's development path and what India is going through today?
Yeah, I think I answered that a little bit on my presentation. I think the culture of gaming in India is way younger than it was in China. You still had PC games culture, the cyber cafes in China at a large scale. And gaming was in China, to some extent, the only unregulated creative medium for people to express. And that's why if you see some of the most popular games in China are RPGs. People can express their individuality because when you have state control on all the entertainment content like TV, shows, everything is state controlled. The only way people could express their creative freedom is via RPG games. India is slightly different. It's like last 10 years. 2016 is when I would say the Indian gaming market really was birthed because data became free and people started playing games for the first time at a scale which was unheard of, right? So I think India will follow its own path. It already has, to some extent, with, there will be some similarities and some dissimilarities. I think I would make this statement about 3 to 5 years. I don't believe that's true. India is slightly behind because India is an equal opportunity disappointment. It disappoints both optimists and pessimists equally. So in that sense, so you need to be a little careful on how you sort of want to take that. I think it'll follow a different path on different type of games, different type of genres. A lot of similarities, status-based society, then rather than time-sensitive society. A lot of civilizational values, proud civilizations, old civilizations. That pride in that civilization is there and across the board. So similarities and dissimilarities will be a longer topic. I'm just being cognizant of the time on the thesis, yeah.
Yeah, if I could just weigh in here, I also think like the characterization that you have in terms of like China being 3 to 5 years behind and India 3 to 5 years behind that is not quite correct because it then kind of characterizes the development of the game development ecosystem as a linear path, which it is not, right? I would say that India right now, in my opinion, is kind of in a state of becoming, meaning that there are a number of entrepreneurs trying to develop the game development ecosystem in India right now, but it's still in the process of being formed. And unlike China, India has a little bit of a disadvantage in terms of its historical context, which is basically as a place where you did live ops for lower cost, right? And so you had a declining game in the West, you kind of shipped it over to India, and in India, you had the whole kind of playbook, everything's figured out, and you just kind of live operate it for lower cost. And so India has missed out on the skill of doing things new. And from a technical perspective, I would say like in China, you have some of the most advanced and sophisticated technical teams in the world, especially like some of the Tencent teams. The team working on Delta Force, for example, are just absolutely incredible. India, on the other hand, you have, obviously, Indians are some of the smartest people in the world, as you can see by just checking who the CEOs of the high-tech companies in Silicon Valley are, right? They're all Indian. But in India, there is a little bit of a stigma associated with the gaming industry, such that it kind of precludes a lot of people from wanting to pursue a career in gaming. And so in a country where a lot of decisions are not just made by the individual, but by families as well, there is a little bit of hesitancy to go into gaming. And so I would say from a technical perspective, China is at an advantage because it doesn't have that stigma. More like smarter people are going there relative to India, where there is a little bit of a stigma. And if you are technically strong in India, then there's always, you know, all these other global companies that are always trying to get you to jump. And because of the language, right, because English is more native to India than in China, it's much easier to just kind of jump over and go to Germany, go to Canada, go to wherever else. So that's the issue.
I agree with what has been said so far, and I'd like to add that part of what we can see is the motivation of the government support. So in China, as I kind of alluded to, a lot of the motivation for developing a game industry is to make sure that the content they want told is told by their own, you know, local studios and developers and so forth. Let our content get out in the world. We see the same thing happening in the Middle East, not for nothing. But what we look at in India, the motivation, as I see it, is to build a game industry is primarily so that that could be kind of like the killer app to build a hardware manufacturing industry extraordinaire. I think that Indian government is sort of looking out for, can we manufacture more computers, more tablets, more phones, more this, more that? That is where I think they see the money, and that if they can get the gamers or the people in India to become gamers, there'll be a lot more sales, there'll be a lot more manufacturing, and I think that the whole, like so the reasons for the government support, I think, I'm guessing, I mean, they're not telling me, I'm guessing, are different between the two countries, and I think that that is what drives the path, or the cart up the path a little bit differently. And of course, there's always going to be leapfrog technologies, as you know, as long as you have a basis of incredibly, you know, mathematically and science and technology-oriented students and other types of industry that where you could like poach from or train or so forth, you're going to have talent. I think a lot of this comes down to where does the government want success to come from and why, and that's, I think, part of, you know, the difference between some of these developing countries and something, say, I don't know, I mean, even in the United States, there's probably a lot of government direction they don't want us to know about, but, you know, there's stuff that happens in these developing economies that way.
Got it. I actually wanted to go back to Joe's point, right? Growing up in a Singaporean family, I also had the same, I'd say, direction from parents that I had to go into a career in like law or like to be a doctor, like to go into a career in the arts. It's like completely frowned upon, like even today, right? So, and with India, I guess you're saying, seeing the same thing, where people would go work for like a big, like Amazon, like as a software engineer, rather than go into the arts. Is that something that can be changed? That cultural difference?
I think it's changed when you have a successful company that emerges from the Indian game development ecosystem that achieves success, and that story of success is spread, right? And I also think it's more of an issue where more people in India need to just become more aware of just how innovative gaming is, and that you can have a viable career in gaming, and it's not just like a useless pastime. And so that cultural aspect, I think, is starting to get fixed, and I think over time it will get better.
I just have a comment on that. I think I started a company in gaming in 2010. At that time, it was like there were not people available for gaming talent in India, right? And it was very tough to train people. And when you trained them, all of them went to the US companies for work. And we were like, what the hell, man? But the point what I will make is, I think the list that I showed of the startups that have made money has inspired a lot of young people now to start gaming companies. I think, like Joe said, this is the right time where an ecosystem is being built. When an ecosystem is being built, the young people are forming companies. And that's where the investing opportunities are, in my opinion. So I think it's not as dire as it was like 10 years back, but it's not as amazing, but it's getting there. It's getting there.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Actually, what I found out recently was that in China, Tsinghua University, which is like the top 2 universities in all of China, they started a course in game development. So you can actually go to one of the top universities, which is super hard to get into, and actually pursue a path in gaming, just because of like the renaissance that we've been seeing in China and all this game development. So hopefully we will see that in time with India as well. Okay, we only have 4 minutes left. Maybe the final question, because we don't have any more time. So we've talked a lot about where both countries have come to and where it stands today. Maybe help us understand where the puck is going very quickly for China, now that it has is quote-unquote dominant in mobile. It's now moving into PC console. And then now with India growing very, very rapidly into mobile. Like, what are like the key themes that investors should care about these 2 countries? Basically, where is the puck going?
I think in India, the market will see a lot of IPOs happening in the first wave of gaming for the real money gaming companies. That's a massive opportunity. The public markets are going to be healthy for another 5 to 10 years. We are at the same stage when 2005 to 2015 of China, where a lot of Chinese gaming companies and tech companies went IPO. And it was driven largely by the local domestic investor investing in public equity markets. That's going to happen for the next 4 to 5 years. That's going to spawn a lot of the ecosystem cash flow to generate more entrepreneurs. So it's the second wave of gaming entrepreneurs will come. What games will they work? I think my take is after Battle Royals, which is already dominating, I think social gaming in terms of dating and social experiences along gaming, Indians are very social in nature, are interesting. I would say strategy games is one thing which the gaming mid-core audience will shift and gravitate towards, and it'll be India building for Indian content is the theme, I would say, as a thesis at large.
Yeah, I've got 2 things. I think one is just watching the trend in terms of the local Indian market. I think people are underestimating, to Anuj's slides, in terms of the massive GDP growth, and we've seen ARPU growth in the local Indian market grow very, very quickly. And so that's why a number of investors in the Indian market are aware that this is a potentially really great market for the local Indian game industry. And I would say this second thing I'd like to highlight is just something that could come to pass. And not to get too political here, but I do think that there are a number of people, especially here in Silicon Valley, who believe that there is at least a 50% chance that China invades Taiwan. And in that scenario, what then happens, right? Well, then this notion of a potential splinter net, of TikTok getting banned immediately, and of Chinese apps getting banned would have a pretty dramatic impact on the gaming ecosystem. Potentially a splinter net, and potentially new winners will emerge based upon that kind of a situation.
Yeah, and for China, I would say, Wukong was a good first game to come out from AAA, right? From a relatively small studio in China. There's going to be more of the same. You're going to see a lot of high-quality games coming out of China. Not only AAA, though. I mean, I see a lot of indie projects that some of them don't even look like a Chinese game. They don't play like a Chinese game. They play more like a Western game. And we're going to see a lot more of these games going forward, I think. and it's going to be in all types of quality, sort of, well, budget levels, I would say.
Just real quick, I think it's just important to emphasize that context in these markets matters a lot. So the data or the trends or the historical, everything does guide forward. However, it's really important to look at the whole geopolitical situation, the drivers and inhibitors from the governments or not from the governments, or what the gamers demand, who's willing to invest there, who's not. It's the whole context of the market, what banking system is available, what's UPI, all these stuff. All the stuff, it matters. You need to understand the holistic kind of environment in order to place educated bets.
And with that, we have come up to time. May we have a round of applause to a very star-studded panel of panelists. I'm very humbled to be here to learn from them. Thank you, everyone.